I'd now like to call on Congressman Adriano Espaillat and Congressman Darren Soto. Congressman Espaillat has worked on bipartisan solutions to some of the country's most pressing issues, most recently introducing protections for LGBT Americans and DACA recipients. Congressman Soto is a member of the new Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, which aims to encourage bipartisanship and working across the aisle amidst heightened tension between parties on Capitol Hill. Welcome, Congressman. Bob, back over to you.
Oh, maybe I'll go right here. Congressman Espaillat, I want to start with you. Your district voted for Hillary Clinton by a small margin, 92-5. And Obama...
Tight election.
Yeah, very tight. And actually, Obama did better. He almost got 95% against Romney. This event is about bipartisanship. What are you doing here?
Ask me again. Well, look, I think that it is important that we promote bipartisanship. Good ideas should not have a political label. Good ideas should be good for one side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle. And so we must continue to try to find that common ground among both majority parties and other sectors of our society that are not wholly subscribed to the traditional Democratic parties. We see more of that happening. We must bring them in. I believe in a big tent approach to politics. And if you believe in that, then you have to listen to everybody, including your political opponents. And so democracy is strengthened when we have a greater commitment to finding a common ground and believing in good ideas that are good for everybody.
Congressman Soto, you replaced Alan Grayson, who was viewed as mostly as a partisan Democrat. Why are you interested in fostering bipartisanship on Capitol Hill?
Well, it starts with my background. I was a commercial attorney by trade. I often had to do a lot of mediations where people had polar opposite interests. I also served in the Florida legislature, in the State House and State Senate, in the minority as a Democrat. So if you wanted to get something done, you had to work across the aisle. One of the most sobering moments was in my first town hall at 29 years of age when I told everybody about what I fought, and then they're like, okay, but what did you do? And so since then, I've always tried to answer that question to constituents, and even in a really grueling primary, we prevailed on talking about getting the job done for Central Florida, and that's what we've been able to do up here, passing multiple amendments that are about to be in law, many of them bipartisan in nature, dealing with everything from holding foreign oil drillers liable for oil spills to helping out our World War II and Korean veterans get their medals in priority order, to space and monitoring of both weather and also working on issues dealing with simulation in our district. So you could get things done in Congress if you work together, and all those things were passed as bipartisan amendments.
You're both new to Congress after a very surprising election to many. Congressman Espaillat, this is actually to both of you, if you can start. What has surprised you? You've got to know some members now. I'm sure not all of them. I'm sure all is a lot of 435 in the House. But has anything surprised you about either friendships or nastiness?
Well, I was a state legislator for 20 years in the lower house, and then as a senator in Albany, where politics is a full contact sport, right? But I was really surprised by the level of combativeness amongst both parties and the extreme partisanship that even manifests itself on the floor of the House. What I felt would have been considered out of decorum in Albany.
Really?
It's something that...
it's much worse on Capitol Hill.
I believe so. I believe that the partisanship and on the floor of the House is as deep as anywhere in the country, and probably it impedes things from moving forward. But I was really surprised when I saw the culture of the place being so deeply divided. And so I come from Albany, where that was somewhat part of the culture, but not as deep and as aggressive as that.
You agree? What are your thoughts?
My expectation was on the big issues, it was going to be very partisan because the nation is divided as well on a lot of these issues. And of course, their members would reflect that. But also on the day-to-day, the surprising part is that there is an ability to get a lot of things that are big for my constituents, but they're not going to make the front page done if you work across the aisle. Most people may not realize that we pass 5 to 10 to 15 bills a day, what we call the committee of the whole, where just members from one committee on both sides of the aisle agree that these bills are not controversial, and so they just vote on a voice vote, and then we never actually even vote on them in a full House vote that evening because they already passed. So bills are passing every day, but they deal with common sense things like making sure that you don't have to press 9 twice in a hotel room to press 911, or making sure that we pass legislation to deal with citrus greening, which is an issue that's hurting our area, sometimes even post offices, things
Right.
So there's a lot of productiveness of the smaller issues that matter to all these different areas of the country, but I expected it to be full contact and a big fight for some of the issues that, matter to all of us, but we have different perspectives: immigration, health care, tax reform. These deserve to be rigorously debated, and people will use hyperbole, they'll use demonstrative aids, they will use whatever they can to make their point. And I expected that, and it really makes you have to tighten your game when you come up here.
Do you both, Congressman Espaillat, for you first, do you support changes to the sexual harassment process on Capitol Hill? Do you think that the bill offered by Jackie Speier and Comstock should pass?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, well, first of all, I think that unfortunately this epidemic, right, has been around for a long, long time. And now women, I think, feel empowered to come out and denounce this. And so we must facilitate that to occur, to happen, to deter that kind of behavior in the future and to ensure the rights of the victims. That should be paramount. And so there should be greater transparency. There should be a better ability for victims to come forward, a process that will guarantee their rights, and that they will be able to tell their story without any retaliation, if you may. And so, yes, I think that we must do that across the board. And obviously, this is a problem across society. Maybe we in Congress should set the example.
Mm-hmm. Would you also back that bill?
So first of all, I would support sexual assault and training in each office. Second, I do think that members should be personally liable. The only thing I'm torn on is that the current system really allows for a lot of victims to be able to get settlements in early without having to go through a long lawsuit. So provided that the bill is not going to ultimately hurt victims by making them have to go through a 2, 3, 4-year court case against a member who may not have any money at the end of that because they'll probably be out of office. But I do think that it should be more transparent. People should know if their member ultimately, through due process, has been found to have had some substantive and well-founded accusations against them. As long as there's that initial due process piece to vet those that may have been just part of the sensationalist political process versus those that are truly meritorious.
I mentioned the 2016 election, which surprised a lot of people, including myself. But we wrote a story the day before the election, and it was entitled, "Why the Nastiness Will Not Go Away on Election Day." Because usually you have an election, everyone says, okay, the people have spoken, and now we must get down to the people's business. That has not happened whatsoever. Congressman Soto, you first. How does that nastiness go away? And do you think that compromise now, which is really viewed as a 4-letter word, that will change because the public may be getting tired of all this gridlock?
Well, so I view it kind of as pendulum politics. Right now it's nasty because before that we had a president who was very inspiring and talked about taking the high road, and I think a lot of Americans were looking for apparently something else next. And that is steeped in our history, though. When you look at everything from when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson ran against each other, and He called Adam someone of hermaphroditic character, of not having the sensibility of a woman or the strength of a man. I mean, that's fighting words in the 1700s. So we see nasty campaigns throughout our history. And I think that the key will be that each member can make their choice of what they say on the floor, what they ran on. I ran a positive campaign that inspired voters, and I think the strongest force in politics is a knowledgeable, inspiring candidate and ultimately elected official. I think that's that Jedi position is the strongest in politics, but it's the hardest to do. You really need to know your stuff, and you really need to have a big vision.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I think that voters are a lot smarter than most politicians think they are. And you often see voters elect an executive from one party and the legislature from another party, or have a mixed legislature. And I don't think that happens by coincidence. I think voters are very smart. I think they want equilibrium. I think they want consensus building. And I think that they vote considering how they can accomplish that in many states and nationally. Right now, we're not in that predicament. We are in the absolute minority. So being in the absolute minority makes it very difficult to get anything done in a bipartisan way, away from the day-to-day pieces of legislation that Congressman Soto highlighted, but the ones that really touch our values as parties, right? I believe that I'm a Democrat because I believe in the traditional values of that party, and otherwise I will be in another party. Mm-hmm. And so when the traditional values of our parties are touched, then there's this very aggressive discourse and debate that pulls us apart. And voters don't want that. They want consensus building. And very often they vote for Democratic legislature and Republican executive to keep that balance. And so we got to promote a greater discussion among the issues, because it is politics that divides us very often. Mm-hmm. Politics is what divides us. The issues bring us closer together very often. Take, for example, the DREAM Act. Polling very high amongst even Trump supporters. Over 60% of Trump supporters feel that these young people should stay here in the country. The issue, right? But the politics of it is toxic, very toxic, and it splits you apart. And so we got to continue to talk about issues that bring us together. The DREAM Act, we got to talk about tax reform in a bipartisan way. Mm-hmm. That would allow the absolute minority to be able to get in some provisions in that law so that we can foster greater communication and consensus building. And that's what democracy is. Those are the tenements of democracy. That's what democracy is all about.
We'll open it for questions in just a couple minutes, but I do want to ask you about, speaking of the opposite of bipartisanship, yesterday on the spending deal, President Trump tweeted at Schumer and Pelosi and said there's going to be no deal. Then Schumer and Pelosi decided to skip a meeting at the White House, and then in the afternoon, the White House conveniently had 2 empty chairs, had a press conference with, not only that, the nameplates of Pelosi and Schumer. So there was a lot of political theater, but really nothing got done. Do you think that was, Congressman Soto, do you think that was a good decision to not go to the White House?
Well, I think the well was poisoned in the morning, and that was certainly the take of our leader that afternoon. I'm on steering and policy, and we got the play-by-play right afterwards. But I can tell you that we are preparing the foundations knowing that we're going to have potentially a big deal at the end of the year on a lot of these issues through, we had mentioned that I was on the Problem Solvers Caucus. So we put together a bipartisan health care bill where we gave more discretion to employers on the mandate. We got rid of the health equipment tax, but we also made sure to have that cost sharing in place and help to stabilize the market. And that was the foundation of now the Murray Alexander proposal that is going forth in the Senate. We're working on issues regarding Dreamers right now in the Problem Solvers Caucus, along with the Hispanic Caucus, so that if we want a clean DREAM Act, but we need to be ready for whatever scenario. And then with tax reform, it would have been amazing if we just had regular order and they had a full hearing where they actually let us to have some amendments in there. The big problem with the tax reform package is we got literally zero input. We got a bill put out, and they're trying to go through reconciliation. So there are ways, and we are preparing for if this noise subsides or if leadership can't make a deal, that there are these safe places where we know, like in the Problem Solvers, where 24 Democrats, 24 Republicans, where there is a middle ground that we can go to. So there is a possibility. And we're just hoping that as the noise subsides, there may be some opportunities to do this by the end of the year.
I want to go to questions. I'll go to that side of the office, to be fair. If you can identify yourself and ask a quick question.
Thank you so much. Luke Lorenz, the Nonpartisan Policy Alliance. My question is for Congressman Soto, and it's in regards to the Problem Solvers Caucus. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on expanding the caucus in 2018, both in terms of membership and also in terms of your agenda for 2018, possibly taking on issues like advanced manufacturing policy, workforce development, apprenticeship programs? These are things I know the administration supports, and I think the American people would really like to see your caucus move forward on some of these issues.
Sure. So we have a 2-by-2 rule. You have to join in as a Democrat and as a Republican together. So I still think that that's an important part of it. I got recruited while I was running for office from the state Senate as one of the founding members, with the idea that I am a pragmatist. I'm socially very progressive, but everything else, it's all up to the details and what we can do to compromise to get something done. Those are areas that I believe there is a lot of common ground on. We know with AI happening and with globalization that we're going to need workers to retool and retrain multiple times a year. We know that while a 4-year degree or graduate degrees are working for folks in this room, it's not going to work for a lot of Americans. Over 70% of Americans will not get a 4-year degree. We'll have less than that. And so these are areas that we can and are working on. And another way we work together is a lot of the folks who are in both those caucuses are either in the Tuesday group on the Republican side or the New Dems on the Democratic side. And we also meet as a group as well. It's kind of a different shade of that same crew. So I will bring forward your feedback on that as something that we can look into.
Right here.
John Wetmore with pedestrians.org. One area that historically has been somewhat bipartisan has been infrastructure. What would each of you like to see in a $1 trillion infrastructure package?
Well, $1 trillion, not a million, not a billion. A
Well,
trillion.
that's what Mr. Trump said.
I once
trillion.
tried to look up the translation in Spanish for $1 trillion, and it wasn't there. But look, I think that infrastructure is sorely needed across the country, and I would like to see a very innovative way of describing what infrastructure is, not just roads and bridges and tunnels, but infrastructure is also public housing. Infrastructure is also our public schools that may be in disarray. So we must expand the description of infrastructure to be very innovative and progressive and something that will lead us to the future. I know that our roads and bridges are in disrepair, but there's a lot of needs out there beyond roads and bridges that I think should be considered. For example, New York City has the New York City Housing Authority, public housing. 400,000 people, bigger than many cities across the states. It has a $17 billion deficit for capital repair, for elevator repair, for pointing, brickwork, elevator. The envelope of the building needs to be repaired so that you don't have mold and leaky pipes inside those apartments, having people live in very inhumane conditions. We are the owners, we the federal government, we're the owner of the housing stock. That should be part of infrastructure as well. as well as roads and bridges. So I think that that could be a very good program to get people working and to bring our country to another level. We're really falling behind in many ways, and we need to step it up.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, in retrospect, a lot of people thought that if Trump had started off with infrastructure, it might be a different tone right now. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Please thank the congressman for their appearance. And I'll hand it back to Johanna. Hey, thanks. Good job. Thank you. Well done. Well done.
Thank you so much to Bob, Congressman Espaillat, and Congressman Soto. This brings us to the end of our program tonight. On behalf of The Hill and our sponsor, the Kennedy Political Union, thanks so much for joining us. If you missed any portion of the discussion, it will be on thehill.com later today. And as a reminder, just fill out your feedback forms. We'd love to hear from you. And join us in the lobby for more conversation. Thanks so much.